and welcome to another Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene episode where your voice matters. We want to welcome everybody once again and welcome to the new faces. Welcome here to the Race Talk Revolution community, the Race Talk Revolution family, and we invite you to come back and tell a friend, bring a friend. Our topic today is coming to the table, taking people beyond the legacy of slavery. And our speakers today are Mrs. Gretchen Jung and Dr. Stacie Walton, who are co-facilitators in the programs for Coming to the Table, located in Sacramento, California. Now, as always, during our conversation today, we ask that you please remain muted. And when we get to the Q&A section of the show, we will instruct you on how to raise your hand. During that time, we will invite you to activate your camera because we want to see your lovely face. And then you can express your questions and comments to our speakers at that time. Until then, we ask that you please give them your full attention and limit your use of the chat as much as possible. We also would like to remind you that Race Talk Revolution is a loving and inclusive platform designed to strip away the false beliefs that keep us separated as a human species, to uncover the not so hidden truth that we all truly do want the same things in life, and to heal the wounds created by systemic racism. Race Talk Revolution is a safe and brave space for people of all backgrounds to share ideas and opinions and explore the nuances of systemic racism while together growing our capacity for effective anti-racist activism. The Race Talk Revolution community is committed to practicing radically inclusive love, So what do we mean by that? Even if you do not understand or agree with what's being shared, we ask that you listen with respect, you listen with appreciation and empathy. You see, it is our commitment that every person be encouraged, heard, and appreciated, because here on the Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene, every voice matters. And now here's my co-host, Reverend Lane Cobb.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to our first time Race Talkers. So happy to have you here. I will have the pleasure of introducing our speakers, and then we will turn the floor over to them. Semi-retired from Kaiser Permanente as a clinical pediatrician serving in the roles of both diversity champion and communication consultant, Dr. Stacie L. Walton has been a medical consultant for healthcare providers and institutions for over 25 years. She has provided grand rounds, lectures, interactive workshops, and facilitated conferences on cultural competence for healthcare providers at all levels of their training in multiple venues across the United States, including Puerto Rico. She attended Stanford University, majoring in cultural anthropology. She graduated from Columbia University's Bachelor's College of Physicians and Surgeons in New York City and trained at the Children's Hospital, Philadelphia. She received her MPH from the University of California at Berkeley. Since retirement, she has focused on the equity issue of racial healing. Over the last 3 years, she has immersed herself in training related to racial healing, restorative justice, and trauma awareness and healing. In 2018, she co-founded a Coming to the Table local group, which is structured to bring people together to have brave conversations about race using the Indigenous practice of healing circles. She has taught classes at Sacramento State and the California North State University campuses, incorporating racial healing using circle processes. Gretchen Jung has been an active participant in social justice for over 30 years. Her most recent activism includes Coming to the Table Racial Healing Circles, Sacramento Area Congregation Together, ACT, Social Justice Group, and facilitating book groups and film groups on social justice themes for the Center for Spiritual Awareness Church. With Stacie Walton, she co-facilitates racial healing webinars for the Renaissance Society with college students at a Sacramento State College and with virtual community groups, including Coming to the Table Sacramento. Her education includes a Master's of Arts in Bilingual Multicultural Education, which led to an adjunct faculty position at Sacramento State University. Welcome to you both. So happy for you to be here today. Please tell us a little bit about coming to the table and how you found your way into the organization. And that is for each of you, please, to answer.
That's for Stacie to start.
Okay, I'll start. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Lane and Eugene, for having Gretchen and I here at Race Talk. We are really honored to be here. And we are also honored to share our relationship with a national organization coming to the table. Gretchen wants me to get this started because I have a short story. We have a story about how we brought coming to the table to West Sacramento. I retired, or I thought I retired from medicine about 4 years ago, and I had a dream list. And one of the things on my dream list, after reading a book called Gathering at the Table, I had read a book by, I'm going blank because I'm a little nervous. You need to breathe. In this book, two individuals, one white male and one black female, had gone on a journey across the country in a car to explore their relationship around race. And I was so moved by the book, I wanted more details. And as I searched for more details, I found out that both of these people were part of an organization called Coming to the Table. And that this group had meetings regularly around healing and race. And they had an upcoming conference. I had retired and I attended an upcoming conference called Gathering at the Table at Eastern Mennonite University. And at that conference, I participated in a workshop specifically on leading racial healing conversations. At the end of that 4-day gathering, I sat at the steps of an plantation. It was midnight. It was pitch dark outside, just a few stars sparkling in the sky. And I had one of those aha moments that Oprah Winfrey talks about. And in that moment, I felt this very strong compulsion or connection with my ancestors who were in the slave graveyard. And I committed the rest of my life to dismantling racism. And in that commitment, I knew that one of the things I needed to do was to start a Coming to the Table group in Sacramento, where I was living. And in that knowing, I knew that I wanted to start this table with a like-minded person of a different race. Fast forward literally 3 weeks, I was checking off another of my dream lists, and that was attending another conference in Portland, Oregon called the Summer Institute for Intercultural Communication. And I was at that conference. I think I was in week 2. It's a 3-week program. I was in week 2 and I was at lunch. And I was getting my lunch, and this is when I'm going to turn the story over to Gretchen.
So I walked up to her and I said, "Hi, would you like to have lunch with me?" And what did you say?
I don't exactly remember. No, I said, no, I'm meeting one of my study groups. I'm meeting a study group for lunch. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. She left me standing there with my tray and went off to meet her group. But something happened and she couldn't find her group, and she came back to the table and she said, "I guess I will have lunch with you." So as is normal, the first question I asked is, "Where are you from?" And she says, "Elk Grove." And I looked at her strangely because I had just spent 2 days by car coming to Portland to meet somebody from Elk Grove, which is a suburb of Sacramento and is approximately 10 miles away from where I live. And I think at that moment, we both might have realized that this was a relationship that was meant to be, because she started telling me about what she wanted to do and how her life was focused on racial healing. and mine had been for a while, but I'd been struggling looking for an appropriate partner to do the work with. And that's how we met in Portland, Oregon, when we live approximately 12 miles from each other.
And then at that, in the moments and days that followed, we started strategizing about, I shared my dream about starting a table in Sacramento, and Gretchen said, I'm in. And the interesting thing about serendipity, or when things are meant to be, by the time I had another week at this conference, and by the time I got home to Sacramento, got on the phone and was talking to Gretchen, she literally had the venue set up and the okay to get the table started in West Sacramento. And I knew it was just really clear that we would begin a really interesting, what has become a very interesting, a very growth-oriented relationship, and focusing on something we both really care deeply about, which is racial healing. That's how we got started.
Yeah, what about the organization? Tell us about what is coming to the table. We know it's a national organization, and you know, before everybody came in, we were talking a little bit about all the things that are offered and that it's volunteer driven. To talk a little bit about the organization, if you would.
Gretchen, would you like me to share the history of how Coming to the Table got started?
I would.
Okay, so approximately 20 years ago, people may have remembered some of the controversy that was in the media around the descendants of Thomas Jefferson. And as many of you know, Thomas Jefferson had a concubine, a slave concubine named Sally Hemings. And they had many children together. They were enslaved people on Thomas Jefferson's plantation. And the controversy had always been, did Thomas Jefferson have Black descendants or not? There were descendants of Thomas Jefferson on both sides of the aisle who really wanted a relationship. And so a group of white descendants and a group of Black descendants decided to have a combined family reunion. And in that decision, they also recognized that coming together was not just enough, that there was a lot of historical trauma, a lot of historical pain related to creating these new relationships. As it so happened, there was someone in the group who had a relationship with the Peace Building Institute at Eastern Mennonite University, which is located in Williamsburg, Virginia. And with the help of the Peace Institute, this family came together with models for managing trauma, models for healing, and were able to establish a process to come together for healing. And what ended up happening was the formation of Coming to the Table. And that was about 20 years ago. And since that time, that original gathering, there was a Coming to the Table group that was established. And then organically over time, more groups started to be established around the country. In the event of George Floyd's murder, that our numbers just sort of exponentially grew. There were so many people looking for a way to talk about race, looking for a way to talk about race in brave spaces. And one of the things that Coming to the Table as an organization offers are the, I'm going to just say, is a formula for creating brave spaces for these often very difficult and painful conversations. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Gretchen, to talk about maybe some of the different aspects of the organization.
You could do that. And better yet, I can put the link in the chat so people can go and see it for themselves. When you see the homepage for Coming to the Table, you will see a calendar of where there are events in various locations, including ours. We meet the first, I'll plug us first. We meet the first Wednesday of every month at 6 o'clock California time, which is kind of late for folks on the other coast. But there is training, there is resources, there are resources around how to do a group, how to facilitate. We have some wonderful touchstones, which are how one acts within a group that that since I've joined Coming to the Table have become central to my life, and hopefully how I react to other people and act within groups. There are book groups, there's a lot of stuff out there. And instead of describing it to you, I'd like to send you to it to check it out. And I will drop that into the chat right now. She said, questioning.
There are a couple things about the organization I want to highlight. One is that we have different working groups that people around the country can plug in. One of those working groups is our reparations working group. And the reparations group has been working tirelessly for almost 2 decades in moving and pushing for reparations. Another group is our Linked Descendants group, where people are supported in investigating their own personal genealogy and finding their linked genealogy across enslavement. And there have been many circumstances where people have found their common lineage, and both Black and white have gotten together for that, going on that journey together for racial healing. That's our Linked Descendants group. There's also a group of writers who come together and support each other to do memoirs, to do writing, blogs, social media. I could go on, and writing books, especially around issues that touch upon enslavement, racial healing. You can imagine the list is long. I feel like I'm forgetting an important group. And then there's just the group that supports the actual work that happens within the individual Coming to the Table groups around the country. So those are some of the major resources that are offered through the organization. One thing I want to highlight is that anyone who has a desire to bring a group of people together to have conversations around race on a regular basis in their community, or if there's anyone who is interested in any of those specific areas of the work that we do in Coming to the Table, on a national and local level, lots of resources are offered. So for instance, when Gretchen and I approached the national organization and said we wanted to start a Coming to the Table chapter in West Sacramento, the answer was, great, how can we help you? There was no 10-page application around qualifications of facilitating groups or, send in your resume, nothing like that. The requirement is a desire, and then the organization says, how can we help you? And so we've deepened our ability to help with trainings. We're doing trainings on the coming to the table approach. And actually, I would like to talk about the coming to the table approach. And I love the way that Gretchen describes the coming to the table approach. So I'm going to turn that over to her.
Wait a minute. I just heard, I'd love to talk about the coming to the table approach. And so I'm going to let Gretchen do it. I don't think so. I don't think so.
Well, here's the coming to the table approach in specifically around racial healing. One of the things that's really clear, that became clear at the national level, that there needed to be a process to talk about race and some of the difficult conversations that it entails in such a way that people felt respected, that it wasn't a blame and shame game, that people's perspectives were honored. When misunderstandings or misconceptions occurred, that there was a process to help people move through that in a respectful and loving manner. And it became clear that one process that would work really well in this situation was the Indigenous peace process. Many people know about restorative justice circles, and restorative justice also comes from the Indigenous practice of peace circles. And so at coming to the table, we also use as our template the Indigenous peace circle. And what that means is the peace circle is a way of maintaining balance and connection within community when there's been harm. And there is some ceremony revolved around it. And like Gretchen had mentioned, we use guidelines, which we call touchstones, that we remind folks about before we begin our conversation. When we meet physically, we meet in a circle, an uninterrupted circle, which symbolizes unity, which symbolizes connectedness. We have in the middle of the circle a ceremonial centerpiece, something that represents or symbolizes the connection in that community. And people bring and offer objects to as a reminder of the community. We have a process of talking with each other that's unique, and that process involves using what's called a talking piece to symbolize it's your turn to speak. And then that talking piece moves around the circle in a pretty steady way so that everyone has a chance to share what's on their heart and share what's in their mind. During the process, we're very, very conscious of the importance of deep listening. That it's in deep listening that we have the most connection. Oftentimes we live in a society where we're always on the edge of sharing our ideas and speaking our mind and answering back to someone. But in the peace building process, we really encourage people to breathe, sit back, and really be in a position of listening deeply with deep empathy to someone else who's speaking. And to give you a sense of what actually happens at one of our meetings is that we start with what we call acknowledgements. We start in our circle. So what do we do now that everyone is remote and virtual? We have a symbolic circle. And that symbolic circle, we create what's called a chat order early in the meeting. And then we follow that order, imagining the talking piece is moving from person to person around the circle. And Gretchen, did I miss anything when I talked about the circle process?
I don't think so. I think you did a beautiful job.
Okay.
The only thing I would add is that following our acknowledgements, we also add a value round, which is how I'm coming to the circle today and what value it is that I bring to the circle. In many ways, the beginning of our circles is much like what Eugene does at the beginning of our conversations here. So the two things are very, very similar in how they sound and how they feel to participants.
I have to thank you so much for all of that breakdown and explanation. I have a couple of questions. I want to start off with this one. One of the working groups is Bittersweet, Linked Through Slavery. And it's a working group of writers and readers of Coming to the Table members who are connecting with ancestors and present day relatives by researching their links to slavery, either as enslaved persons or slave owners. So can you tell us how that works? And then I have a follow-up question to that.
Well, Bittersweet is, yes, it is part of the Linked Descendants group or resource group, working group. And in the Descendants working group, there are lots of activities surrounding tracing ancestry. One of the resources that's part of the Bittersweet group are several genealogists who are intimately involved with Coming to the Table. And so those resources are available. The Linked Descendants group meets regularly to share their progress with each other, to ask questions about resources, to get guidance for their own personal genealogy search. And then oftentimes people find their connection, that enslaved history connection, and then proceed to do that personal work with each other. And then the Bittersweet part of Linked Descendants are those who are involved in that genealogy work who then want to write about it. And so they meet, the Bittersweet group also meets on a regular basis to, as writers do, to support each other's writing.
So thank you. So the follow-up questions is so doing that work, especially for Black Americans, African Americans, it can be difficult to trace, that lineage. Yeah. So what is the challenge to people of color in doing this work, and what is the benefit?
Well, I would say one of the challenges, of course, is historical documents. And so most African Americans can trace themselves to, I believe it's 1860 when documentation or the census data started appearing. And even then, going further back, there's limitation around how written documents were kept. One of the beauties of Coming to the Table is that we have a woman who's been part of the organization from pretty much its inception. I just had a blank. Sharon Morgan. Sharon Morgan is actually one of the people I talked about earlier who'd written the book Gathering to the Table. But that's what she does. She's a genealogist, and she has creatively found resources beyond the US Census for helping people find their ancestry. And the benefits, I can speak for myself. I think people get involved in their genealogy for different reasons. So this is a personal comment. For myself, one of the biggest wounds or voids in my life is knowing where I come from. And I have oral history, and I've also learned some of my genealogy through records. But I feel a void when I'm with especially other people of color and white folks too, who can talk about going to their home country, having family reunions with on vacation in Europe or on vacation in Africa. I have African friends who have a shared language with their community, who have shared history that goes back thousands and thousands of years. Do I claim my African heritage? Absolutely. Can I tell you exactly what parts of Africa my ancestors come from? I can give you from my DNA, I can give you a general idea. I can say, Cameroon and Ivory Coast. But can I walk on that land and say that this is where my great grandfather comes from, or I'm part of this particular tribe? I don't have that knowledge. And for me personally, it feels like a big void. So for me, going through that process gets me more connected to my history, to my ancestry, to who I am. And that's a personal description of how it benefits me.
Thank you. So I want to continue this conversation about taking people beyond the legacy of slavery. And I'm curious about what that means to the two of you as you do this work, perhaps what it means to the organization. Is it about more than just bringing people together? What does that look like? What does it mean, taking people beyond the legacy of slavery?
For me, it's about bringing people together. It is amazing to me how many white people I know don't know anybody who is Black. I live in a very, very diverse city. I attend the Center for Spiritual Awareness in West Sacramento, which is a very diverse church. And yet I have friends, white friends, who have no Black friends, who have no Black acquaintances. And that's kind of mind-boggling to me. So just getting white people to sit down and talk about their fears of talking to Black people, I think is important and healing.
So having said that, then, may I ask, what has been your experience as co-facilitators? What do you find that you mentioned white people's fear of talking to Black people. What are people grappling with? And we already know what the process is to help people move forward, but what are you finding as co-facilitators? What's your experience, and what is your experience in group with what are people struggling with? And maybe even what are they emerging with?
I'm going to answer the question by moving slightly away from coming to the table and talking about the other thing that Stacie said that when she talked to me about what she wanted to do, I said, I'm in. I have been saying that pretty continuously for the last 4 years. Whenever she says, I think we should, I say, I'm in, even before she finishes her sentence. And one of the things we have done now for 6 semesters is teaching a class called either Conversations Around Race or Racial Healing or some other thing. We tend to get more white people than Black people, and I don't blame the Black people for not joining us, because sometimes the white people are pretty clueless, myself included. But what I have found is that the white folks especially get over their fears that I think are media driven, but definitely some of their fear about who the other is, and their fear about looking stupid or unknowledgeable or like a Karen. And so both in our 15-week class and in our coming to the table groups, I feel that we bring people to the table. We let them sit down and talk to each other in a safe environment. Safe needs to be defined, but in a safe environment where they can see each other's humanity. What would you add to that, Stacie? You need to unmute first.
I don't know how I got muted, but I did. I just would like to add to that, one of my intellectual or academic interests is in the concept of implicit bias or unconscious bias. And unconscious biases are those beliefs that we hold very tightly, but very deeply in our psyche. We're literally not aware of them. And our collective history and our media history has created these tropes about Black people that are just not true. That we are angry, that we are violent, that we are criminals, like that. Yes, in all groups, we have violent people, we have criminals. But my personal experience with Black men has been a loving father who supported his family under the harshest circumstances. My experience with Black women is loving and caring and nurturing. So this image of the angry Black woman is bizarre to me. And as a Black woman, when I get angry, the fact that I have to, that I consciously am modifying that normal human reaction so that I don't come across supporting a stereotype is ridiculous. So just to reinforce what Gretchen is saying is we give people the opportunity to see a Black person in a setting and see us as who we are and see us as fellow human beings. When we first started, I was always surprised at the amount of fear and trepidation that white people would share in the circle. And I was like, what do you think we are? We're human just like you. And so those were conversations Gretchen and I would have early on. The other thing that I think that happens, and I share this in circles with white folks, and I think this is really important for white folks to understand, because even with our intention to not make this a blame or shame game, white folks come to the table feeling very ashamed, guilty about the history of enslavement. And there are current issues that we're having now. And one thing and I'm speaking for myself, and I know that a lot of people of color feel this way as well. When we're in these spaces, it can be so liberating to know that there are 10, 15, 20 white folks in the space who actually care, who are actually working on not only their own personal transformation, but are actively working in community to make this a better place, to dismantle racism. You know, the first time I met a white person who was quote unquote an anti-racist was when I was 40 years old. And it was mind-boggling at the time. We sat down and we were having a conversation over a cup of coffee. I almost fell out of my chair. You mean there are white people who actually care about Black people? And it's a sad comment to make, but yeah, I was 40 years old. And so to answer your question, that is something that has, it can be very difficult as someone of color, someone Black, being in a space with other adults who have never, ever thought about the oppression that Black people experience in this country. But at the same time, knowing that people are showing up can be really, really reassuring.
Thank you. I have a question before we go to the Q&A. Several months ago, Race Talk Revolution hosted a conversation about critical race theory. So what are your thoughts about the restrictions that are being placed on school systems around teaching true history?
Stacie, can I start this one?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Well, let's see. What I know about systemic racism is that it always finds another way to bring racism to the fore. And this is what it is. It's just part of the system trying to stop us from educating ourselves about our past, our shared past, our true shared past. And it's made me look at my local school board a lot differently than I did in the past, because I think it is important for all of us to be involved with that school board, to be fighting that we teach history the way it happened, not the way the white supremacist system wants us to teach it. Okay, what do you want to add, Stacie? I'm off my soapbox now. And you're muted again.
Can you hear me now? I don't think it's a soapbox. I think it's just truth. You're just speaking truth, Gretchen. That this is another example of, you know, that backlash that happens when we're trying to move out of this paradigm of white supremacy ideology. And, you know, it's, there's been so much false information surrounding critical race theory. I mean, critical race theory is a graduate level conversation. And we can, in curricula, design history in a way that's appropriate for all ages. Is critical race theory an appropriate curriculum for fifth graders? Absolutely not. But real history, our history, as Gretchen was saying, is absolutely appropriate and can be designed in a way that it is not only appropriate, but interesting and engaging and transformational for a fifth grader. To me, the backlash has been all political. It's been very divisive and basically a smokescreen so that white supremacist ideology can continue.
Yeah, that would be my final comment. The critical race theory isn't about critical race theory. It's about telling the truth. And people are attacking something they don't even know what it is.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure we're going to have a couple more questions around that as we go into our Q&A section. Just real fast, for those of you who are new, to raise your hand, go to take your cursor down to the bottom of the screen, the right-hand side, in the icons, you see reactions. Click on reactions and click the bar that says raise hand. If you don't see it there, then go to the participants on the others on the left side of the icons, click on participants, or click on the up arrow. Click on participants, not the up arrow. Click on participants, find your name, click on the three dots, and then you should be able to find access to raising your hand there. Also, we want to remind you that in asking your questions or making a comment, please keep it a minute or less, because we want to have time for everyone to ask their questions as well as our presenters to answer the questions. Thank you very much. So we have Hugh and then PJ. Hugh, is this your first time?
Hi there. No, I have been an irregular participant.
Okay.
And at the same time, I've been hugely grateful for the opportunity to participate when I've been able to. As someone who, thank you. Yeah, as someone who grew up in Ireland, which is a hugely, or was, it's changing, a hugely homogenous, light bread community. It's been very, very, what's the word? Not instructive is even the wrong word. Like I've been very grateful and profoundly grateful for the opportunity in the time I've lived in the US to become so much more aware than I ever was of like the real live issues that are being discussed in forums like this. The question I'd like to ask is, I'm wondering, what is the experience of Black members of the circles you're describing in effectively being asked to educate white people on Black racism in a way that either re-traumatizes or re-oppresses the Black members?
Great question.
May I answer that, Gretchen? May I?
Absolutely.
It is a very unique, well, not unique. We know when we're talking about race that we all are interacting with race in very specific ways at different times of our lives. And Black people self-select into these conversations. And so we've had the experience of having Black folks show up one time. And then we've had the experience of Black folks showing up and being active participants and relishing the opportunity to educate white folks. So there's that spectrum. In our race conversation courses, we tend to have those Black folks who, or people of color who are comfortable with sharing their stories and comfortable with educating, show up the first day, and they're our biggest champions on the last day. And we've also had the experience where people have shared with us, you know, that was too painful. I'm not coming back. This isn't the space for me. So we've seen the spectrum for Black folks who choose to be part of the conversations, and there's no judgment around it. We are very understanding of how traumatizing or re-traumatizing these conversations can be. And one thing that Gretchen and I have been really thoughtful about, especially on this issue, is if we know someone Black is coming into the space, to have this conversation with them before they come. Or at least we've made that attempt to support people who, people of color before they come to the space. Because like Gretchen was saying, for a lot of white people, this is the first time they've had the opportunity to be in community with someone of color. And we're human, we're curious, we want to know, we want to get better, we want to transform. And how do we do that? We do that by being educated.
Thank you.
May I just say, as a white man who previously was absolutely oblivious to so much of what we're talking about here, I'm hugely grateful for the courage and the generosity of spirit of people like you, Stacie, who have been very important in my life over the last number of years in helping me go from ignorant to aware.
Thank you, Hugh.
Thank you, Hugh. Great question.
And I would second that, Hugh.
We have PJ, Joe, and then Barbara.
I don't really have a question. I just this coming to the table approach is such a wonderful approach. And they talked about the touchstones, and for anyone, go to the website and read over the touchstones. It's a way that they read those before the circle process, and it's a way, anyway, I love the touchstones, and they've been a part of my life, and I continue to work on this process. And when we have book groups, we go into affinity circles, and those are wonderful as well. I just am very grateful for the coming to the table approach, and this race talk has really opened up my life. So not really a question, just a cheerleader. So thank you.
Appreciate that so much. Thank you. And thank you for being here consistently. And another consistent member of our Race Talk community is Joe. You are up.
Thank you, Eugene and Lay. I'll get right to the point just so more people can ask their questions. Dr. Walton, here's my question for you. For newcomers to a forum like this, especially people that look like me, newcomers coming to a forum like this, what advice would you have to individuals who are perhaps newcomers to a forum like this, and they find themselves uncomfortable and they're not ready to speak up and pose questions? What advice do you have for them for other things that they can do to continue their journey, to continue their exploration? If they were blind in the past to their white privilege and to systemic racism, what advice might you offer for other alternatives for people to continue on the journey, but in a way that's maybe more comfortable for them without them feeling the anxiety of having to speak up to feel like they're fully participating in that journey?
Thank you. That's a great question. First of all, I want to share that in our peace process, our circle process, we always give people the opportunity not to speak. And so that's worked into our procedure, and it's done in such a way that we hope that we take, the spotlight isn't there. It's part of the process that if you're not ready to speak, if you don't have something to say, that you can be skipped. And then we also create opportunity if you change your mind for participating. So that's part of our process. But in general, I would say, and this is something that PJ just mentioned, the affinity circle. You can find affinity circles. And when we talk about affinity circles, we're talking about homogeneous racial groups that are having these conversations. So one of the things that Gretchen does in her work is she runs white affinity circles where white folks get together and talk about race. And so that's one, we recognize that sometimes what works and what is helpful is getting together with people who've had the same or similar lived life experience, have these conversations separately, and then bring the group together. That's one of the racial healing workshops that Gretchen and I did. The first time we did it, I think it was when we debriefed our first session, we looked at each other and said, maybe we need some affinity circles. And so we built in affinity circles within our course. And it was one of the most well-received processes in our course, having people have that opportunity. So I would say affinity circles is a great way to continue the conversation. And then I would say, knowledge is everything. When you put some information and some knowledge in your toolbox, it creates more space. So, that's what I say to everyone, white folks in particular, but everyone in general, do your homework. We're in an information age.
Yes.
You don't have to leave your home. You don't have to leave your bedroom. You don't have to leave, you have information at your fingertips. So do your homework, create a foundation, learn the language, and you'll find yourself more willing to jump into the conversation. I hope that's helpful.
I want to add one little thing.
Yes.
And that is that it's okay to be uncomfortable. As a matter of fact, it's good when you're uncomfortable. When you're uncomfortable, that's where the learning takes place. So breathe, center yourself, know that you're safe, because safe is not just being uncomfortable. Safe is being challenged physically in some way. If you're not being challenged physically in some way, then you're safe. If you're uncomfortable, but you'll live through it. And as a matter of fact, it'll be a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Gretchen.
Barbara, I hope you're going to ask the question you put in the chat.
Yeah, so we have Barbara and then
thank you.
Karen.
Thank you so much for hosting this wonderful talk this morning. Yes, I am part of a inclusion circle at my church, and I would love to take some learnings back. Do you have a specific agenda that you show to new members of a group so that they know how the circle is run? Once you pass out the talking stick and go over touchstones, and so is there a specific agenda or focus to each group topic? And then what if something is said by someone that is offensive to someone else? What if a microaggression happens in the meeting? Or if a person just says something that may unintentionally do harm to someone else in the sharing, how is that handled? Thank you.
I noticed PJ held up a book. You could do that again now, PJ, called The Little Book of Circle Process, which is it's 76 pages. It's a great thing. Kay Pranis. It's a great way to learn how to do this. It's a great introduction. The second part of your question is what happens when harm is done? We're back to the touchstones. One of our touchstones talks about ouches and whoops. Ouches are when somebody says something that is hurtful and you hear it. We all in the circle have a responsibility to say ouch and then to explain what we heard. And whoops is when I open my mouth and something comes out that is not at all, sounds much worse outside than it did inside my head. And so I say whoops, and then I clean up after myself. Both are means to protect everybody in the circle and to expand our learning. What
Thank
do
you very
want?
much.
You're welcome. Stacie, do you have something you'd like to add?
Oh, I would just absolutely, what I would add specifically for the person who asked the question can't see your name on my screen. But some other, besides the book, another resource is Coming to the Table actually does trainings for the circle process at an incredible, reasonable price. I mean, I don't know, what was it, $40, $50, something incredibly reasonable.
Yeah.
That where the entire process is reviewed. So, you know, depending on what kind of learner you are, if you're a visual learner, that book is great. It has all the steps to running a circle, and talks about the oops and whoops in it. Ouch and whoops, sorry. Ouch and whoops in it. But if you're someone who's more kinesthetic or auditory, you might benefit from one of the workshops, and those are run all through the year. The other option is join us on one of the first Wednesdays of the month and just experience our circle process and see us go through the steps. And you would be more than welcome. We've had folks literally come for that reason. They're in the process of starting their own groups, and they just want some experience, and they come, you know, once or a few times to feel more empowered to get their groups up and running.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
So do I understand that if because we're, that you guys are all totally virtual now, or there are groups that are virtual? So even though I'm in New York, if there's no group on over here with me right now, I can like come to your group? That's okay?
Oh,
Not
absolutely.
only okay, we'd love it.
Okay, that's awesome.
It's also true that there is a virtual group through Coming to the Table that meets either the first or second Saturday of each month.
Yes.
So, and many of the groups are virtual. So if you don't like our group, go to the one in Culver City / Santa Monica and try them out. Or go to the one in Atlanta. They're great. Or the one in Denver is really fantastic too. So
And the
there's
one in New York
options.
is really amazing as well.
Oh yeah, I know New
I didn't
York.
wanna
I forgot
mention
about
that.
New York.
Why are you telling Lane about all the other groups around the country? There's only one group. West
That's true.
Sacramento.
That's true. But we're more fun than the other groups.
One
Noted,
group, many
noted.
locations. We have Karen and then Gary.
Hi, everybody. I'd really like to thank the presenters today and Lane and Eugene for hosting these meetings. The question I have today is around a little while ago when you were talking about critical race theory and the fact that what people are reacting to so negatively is that they don't really know what critical race theory is and that it's not taught in schools. But my question around that is, what is and I've had a lot of conversations like this with people who are reacting to critical race theory being taught in schools, which it isn't. And I feel like the media around it really pushes all of the implicit bias buttons and unconscious bias buttons. And I think it's, in my experience, to have the conversations around that with somebody who's reactive to it only is fruitful if they've already thought about the fact that they have implicit and unconscious bias. What are some tools for talking to folks who are just freaking out about it and don't know that they have implicit and unconscious bias? And that's what's operating in their response to this.
Well, Karen, go ahead.
My screen just
No,
froze
it's all
up.
right. You're good. You're good, Karen. We heard your question. We were debating who gets to speak first, and I think it's
Okay.
Stacie.
There's a great book called The Neuroscience of Inclusion. And it's the authors are Robinson and Casey, Casey with a C. And what I love about that book is they really outline how our brains are wired for implicit bias.
Mm.
And then they move into something called managing brain states. So they give us the tools to recognize when you are in your sort of fight flight brain state, when having a conversation is literally fruitless. And then they talk about how to, you know, in the moment, move out of that fight flight state of mind into a more open, perceptive, less reactionary brain state, where conversations can be very fruitful, even when there's a big difference in opinion. And so I really like their approach in looking at how the brain is wired, how to recognize, you know, not only someone else has been triggered and they're reactionary, but also for ourselves personally, like maybe this isn't the right time for me to have this conversation with someone, or let me take a moment to breathe, to relax, and they'll come back to it. But I really like their approach in like connecting the neuroscience with the implicit bias, and then how we can almost circumvent or take advantage of what we know about the brain to manage our implicit bias.
That's really helpful.
Casey and Robinson, The Neuroscience of Inclusion.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure. Gretchen, do you want to add to that?
The only thing I would add to that is start by asking them questions and see if you can get them to reflect on just how much they don't know. Where did you come up with that? Why do you believe that? Who taught you? Where did you see this? What have you read about critical race theory? Do you know that it's based in the legal profession and really has very little to do with schools at all? And good luck.
Thank you.
Being curious, asking questions. We have Gary, Kimness, and then Robin.
I just have a quick question. I'm sorry for the lighting here, but I can't do anything about it. I have been working virtually with Ebenezer Baptist Church on the Ending Mass Incarceration program that started there and is now spread nationwide. And I'm wondering if Coming to the Table has a working group on ending mass incarceration.
I don't think Coming to the Table has a group about ending mass incarceration. I personally am leading a book group called, based on Colin Kaepernick's new book, Abolition for the People. So I know that there are other groups out there that are looking for ending incarceration, ending policing, and even getting rid of soldiering.
Actually, we don't have an official work group on ending incarceration. However, under the umbrella of reparations is one of the groups in the Southeast is very much involved in this issue. And I could connect you to the person that I know, Kim, and I'm forgetting her last name, who is very much involved in that. and has gotten the reparations group to be involved in the issue of mass incarceration. So not an official work group like Linked Descendants or Bittersweet, but or our meditation group, but there are I'm having trouble with there is someone working on this, and they are utilizing the relationships that coming to the table. And I'd be happy to connect you with that group.
Excellent. I will send you my email on the chat.
Okay. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. We have Kimness and then Robin. Kimness, are you there? Okay, we'll go to Robin and then we'll come back to Kimness.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back here after long absence. So I really appreciated what you said, Gretchen, about how many white people just don't have any people of color, certainly don't have any close connections with people of color, and who come to the table, you know, in fear and trembling even, but, you know, finally finding a way to make some connections. What I'm curious about is that as a white person, I've been a full-time white person my whole life, and I've really studied white people carefully, especially with respect to racial justice and equity. And one thing I know is that frequently we white people are so divorced from people of color in our lives that just being able to be at the table, if you will, is enough. You know, now, oh great, now I have some Black friends, and now I'm experiencing racial healing. You mentioned several times how healing it can be. So, oh goody, you know, I can tell that I'm feeling healed, and I'm good now. And I'm just curious if there are ways that coming to the table supports such white folks in moving beyond that, moving to action, moving to anti-racism.
We keep talking about our touchstones, and I'm going to paraphrase now because I don't have this firmly committed to memory, but the last line in our touchstone says, basically, coming to the table is a good thing. Staying at the table, staying committed and connected is the way toward racial healing and transformation. And of course, that's true. The people who come to our classes, we tend to have repeaters because they find it so helpful that they come back and then they come back again. And we have a couple of people who have been there at least 3 times now, some 4, I think. So I think when we who are white get over our initial fear of the other and are able to sit down at the table with them, that sort of breaks a barrier, and then more and more the learning takes place. I think that's one of the reasons why Race Talk Revolution is so wonderful, because you show up every week and every week you learn a little more, something different, something good.
Thank you.
Stacie, you want to add?
What I'd like to add is I would probably argue that the majority of folks who are coming to the table are in action around racial justice and anti-racism. I know for myself personally, what supports me staying in action is having this forum every once a month to, you know, fill the cup to help me feel empowered and emboldened to go out in the world and continue doing the work. And in particular, there are a couple groups around the country that their main, their culture with their group is an action culture. So my example would be the Denver group. They are actively working on reparations. So when you see them meet, it's related to some action around reparations. I would argue that our group in West Sacramento is more supporting the racial healing. So our intention and our focus is racial healing. And in doing that, it supports folks who participate in the anti-racist work they're doing in general.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Robin. Kimness.
Yes. Am I being heard now?
Yep.
Okay, good. You pretty much answered, well, you mostly answered the question I have, but I'm still going to ask you. Now, it sounds like the table is doing a great job with the social emotional aspect of our society. And I was curious about the social political aspect of it, because I believe once you break through some of those barriers with the fear and ignorance and having people being able to truly talk with each other, there is also that political aspect. So there are a lot of political moves that are happening, like the voter suppression and the policing issue, and as someone brought up the mass incarceration. Are there, and kind of answered it talking about the reparation aspect of it, but are there any steps of getting people more politically charged to make our society more safer so we don't have to worry about having these conversations in the future for our children? Thank you.
Gretchen, or do you want me to say something?
Why don't you go first and I'll add
I
on.
would say that we support any political work that's happening around anti-racism, but that's not the organization's focus. Our focus really, I like the way that you presented that. Our focus is the social emotional aspect of racial healing. And I think some of the folks in our organization would argue, without the racial healing, how can you really do the political work? And I would argue that's on both sides, not just for white folks. Definitely for white folks, if they're not doing the work involved in the social emotional, if they're not, their lens for looking at the world does not include one that's more diverse and more equitable and that includes inclusion, their political work will not have the focus that it needs to have. We all know that there's so many movements that are so fragmented because there's this common goal, but we can't seem to make strides on it because those coalitions are so fragmented around race, around sexism, around, I could go on. And until those conversations are happening in a real way that's transformational, how do you bring people together in any real way to push political movements forward? So that's how I'd answer your question. It's not that we're out of alignment with the political work, the actual political work, but our focus is the focus is mostly on the social emotional. And then keeping in mind each group that forms has its own culture. And some are more leaning towards social emotional. And then, as I was saying, for instance, the Denver group, they're all about political action around reparations. That's the conversation when they get together. That's the conversation as they push their agenda across the national organization. So I don't know if that's
Thank you so much. I
helpful.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
And then we have Adine, and Adine will be our last question for the day.
Great. Thank you so much for the presentation. What I want to address both what Kim has said and what Dr. Walton has been saying. I think there is another level of fear that many whites experience, even if they have gone into groups like yours. And it's the fear or the inability to challenge the white power structure.
Mhm.
And I mean, as an African American, I have certainly, I've had many white acquaintances ever since I was a child. So I've never had difficulty communicating with whites. But I have noticed that there is an unwillingness at a certain level to march forward and challenge white power structure. And if whites are not able or willing to challenge their own people, really, this is what we're talking about, then there is this frustration that we're not moving ahead fast enough, and because we can't do it without really brave white allies.
The answer to that is yes. I agree. Yeah, I agree. As someone who has been an activist for many years now, it's true. It's good to be able to talk, but it's more important to be able to do the walk.
Yes.
You know, it reminds me, Adine, thank you for bringing that up. It reminds me of a video that Gretchen and I shared in our class on Monday, moving from allyship to co-conspiratorship. And Bettina Love talks about, in her book, so we want more than to survive.
We want to do more than survive. We want to do more than survive.
We want to do more than to survive. Talks about abolition. And she talks about how there was this point in our history, and it's not the only point, don't get me wrong, where white folks alongside Black folks were involved in the abolitionist movement. And it required a certain level of belief and faith and trust, you know, without the benefit of modern technology.
Right.
Right. And so I encourage everyone to watch that short clip on C-SPAN. If you Google Bettina Love and co-conspiratorship, she talks about what true allyship looks like, what it means to be in action. And she gives some really great examples.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I just put that into the chat for folks, both the book by Bettina Love and you said it was a CNN link.
Yeah, if you just Google Bettina Love and co-conspirator, it's a very popular clip. It'll come right up.
Excellent.
Thank you, Adine, for your question. And I have a question for our two guests. And this is a question that we ask everybody who comes into the show who presents is, what is your call to action for us, the Race Talk community?
My call to action would be exactly what we've just discussed. Yes, it's very good to show up here once a week, but what are we doing? What is our action? How are we making a personal difference in our communities?
Dr. Stacie?
Love that.
I totally, I love Gretchen's call to action. I feel compelled to have another one, not the same one, even though that's the one I'm constantly gravitating towards. This is what I would say. Identify today what scares you the most in this conversation, and then identify someone that you want to have this conversation with. And I challenge you between now and the next race talk to have that conversation. Call that person on the phone, ask them over for coffee, invite them to dinner, and then just do it. Start the conversation. And I think, well, I know you will be pleasantly surprised at how it will go.
And remember, your discomfort is a good thing. That's your growth point. Go for it.
One of my sons said, you know, I love this is the saying, be comfortable with the discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Lane?
Well, we've come to that time. Thank you. This has been absolutely brilliant. Gretchen Jung and Dr. Stacie Walton of Coming to the Table Sacramento. Ladies, thank you so much for leading this absolutely loving, inclusive, courageous, brilliant conversation about bringing us together on the level of humanity. Please find yourself a group or just go to the website comingtothetable.org. Brilliant resource page. The touchstones are right there. Please do yourself a favor, go to that website. There is something for everybody, absolutely. And I'm also going to put into the chat opportunities for your further growth and development with an Undoing Racism workshop and the like. You can go to Anti-Racist Alliance. You can go to People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. You can go to Equity Consulting Network, and you could also go to CISWAC, Centers for the Study of White American Culture, cswac.org. I'm going to put that into the chat. Please join us next week. We are going to be speaking about teaching the truth in schools. Our speaker is going to be Ms. Teresa Willis of Anansi Learning. It's a developmental platform that offers educators tools to teach students how to understand primary sources using historical thinking skills and strategies so they can discover for themselves the beauty, the horror, the complexities, and the nuances of US history. So if you're interested in talking about how to teach truth in schools, please join us next week. Eugene.
Nancy, if you're interested, and I know that you are, so just be here. And as always, we remind you, this is our call to action, and that was already said, right? As always, we remind you to connect with people who don't look like or live like you. Remember that we are all in this together, and it will take all of us working together to create a world that works for everyone. If you have topics or speakers that you would like us to feature, please contact us at info@racetalkrevolution.com. Again, that is info@racetalkrevolution.com. Because here on Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene, your voice matters. Have a great afternoon, great week.
Thank you, everybody. If this was your first time, please don't be a stranger. Please come back. Love you all. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much, Gretchen and Stacie.
Thank you so much.